I received a phone call, and that phone call had basically blew my mind because it informed me that I would be a suspect for a crime I had no idea that took place.
Time is the one thing you can never get back. Imagine over 25 years of your life, your youth, your memories, your future stolen. This is not just the story of a wrongful conviction. This is the story of Jon-Adrian J.J. Velazquez and the life he lived while the world moved on without him. It begins with something small, so small you might miss it if you weren't looking closely. A phone ringing in a Bronx apartment. A man answering. A robbery gone terribly wrong. A retired NYPD officer, Albert Ward, shot and killed in a Harlem numbers spot. Panic. Confusion. Eyewitnesses shaken by a moment too fast, too violent, too chaotic to truly see. And then, a name pulled out of thin air. A sketch that didn't look like him. A witness pressured to point to a photo. A jailhouse informant whispering a story he knew would earn him a deal. A story built on ghosts. 1 week, J.J. Velazquez was a son, a brother, a friend, a young man who loved the sound of horses thundering down the track at Aqueduct, who dreamed of one day raising his boys in peace. And the next, he was a murderer on paper, a villain in the eyes of the system, a prisoner sentenced to life for a crime no evidence tied him to. But the real horror wasn't the courtroom. It was what came after, the slow, quiet erasure of a man's life. Days that turned into years, years that turned into decades. While the world outside raced ahead, new technologies, new presidents, new wars, new pandemics. JJ remained frozen in 1998, trapped inside a cell, watching life through a television screen. Before we go any deeper into this chilling case, hit the like button and subscribe for more wrongful conviction stories. This investigation is only beginning, and you won't want to miss how decades of silence, heartbreak, and relentless pursuit of justice finally reveal the truth. This is the story of what time steals, and what a man refuses to let it take. This is J.J. Velazquez's story. Before the world stole his years, before the system painted him as a monster, Jon-Adrian J.J. Velazquez was a boy of sound, light, and possibility. The Bronx hummed around him, its rhythm not just in the traffic but in the voices of neighbors, the squeak of sneakers on the sidewalks, the distant whinny of horses at Aqueduct racetrack. That morning air smelled of baked bread from the corner deli, of asphalt warmed by the sun, of laundry drying on fire escapes. JJ moved through it all with a quiet attentiveness. He remembered the way sunlight fell through the bars of the apartment window, scattering across the faded wallpaper, painting tiny golden squares on the floor. The smell of his mother's cooking would linger long after breakfast. He would hear the faint hum of a radio playing salsa, his father's chuckle echoing through the kitchen, and for a few brief, ordinary minutes, the world felt safe, familiar, forgiving. He had dreams that smelled like oil and dirt, the tack rooms at the horse track, the metallic tang of horses' breath, the adrenaline as the horses thundered past the grandstand. He imagined one day owning a small stable, raising strong, sleek horses, seeing his children run alongside them. JJ's aspirations were never loud, never demanding attention. They were private, delicate, almost fragile in the way he carried them with him like a secret warmth in his chest. Even as a teenager, he noticed details others ignored. The texture of the chain-link fence in the playground, the precise pattern of cracks on the basketball court, the way his mother's hands trembled slightly when she laughed too hard. These were the small moments that made him alive, that tethered him to a reality that felt safe and comprehensible. Family was the anchor of his world. Sunday dinners were filled with laughter, with the sharp tang of tomato sauce on plates, the hum of conversation, the distant cries of children playing on the stoop. JJ sat quietly, absorbing it all, his hand brushing against his little brother's shoulder in gentle solidarity. He had learned early that love was often quiet, but heavy with meaning. He listened more than he spoke, observed more than he acted, but he loved fiercely in the ways he could, protecting, sharing, staying present. School was another stage of observation. He noticed patterns in people, the way someone fidgeted when lying, the slight hesitation in a friend's greeting, the body language of teachers who were tired but trying to hide it. JJ was polite, soft-spoken, often invisible in a room full of louder voices. But that invisibility was not weakness. It was strategy. He was learning, always learning, measuring, recording, cataloging the world as it passed him by. And yet, even in this ordinary existence, he had glimpses of danger. The city was alive with stories that whispered in the background. The robbery down the street, the sudden arrest of someone he vaguely knew, the news ticker scrolling a homicide. He observed these events like a distant storm on the horizon. They were not his storms, not yet. He was aware, cautious, but allowed himself the innocence of a boy still tethered to safety. Music was another refuge. He could lose himself in the crackle of a cassette tape or the bass of a neighbor's boombox. In those notes, he found clarity, rhythm, an understanding that the world could be made sense of, at least for the length of a song. On weekends, he would hum quietly while folding laundry or sweeping the sidewalk in front of the apartment building, a soft melody threading through the mundane tasks of life. JJ's friends described him as dependable, loyal, quietly brave. He never sought fights, never demanded attention, but he would stand firm if someone needed him. His moral compass was precise, unwavering. His eyes were always alert, scanning for danger, scanning for opportunity, scanning for kindness. He carried himself with a cautious dignity, a sense that life could be cruel, but also that he could endure it if he remained observant and faithful to what he knew to be true. And dreams, above all, marked the rhythm of his days. Dreams of freedom, of integrity, of the small victories of a life carefully lived. He could imagine a day when he would look back on these Bronx streets with fondness rather than the quiet dread of inevitability. In those dreams, he laughed, he loved, he moved through the city like it was a canvas, painting each moment with the colors of his choosing. But time is fragile. It can shatter in a single, unknowable instant. And for JJ, that moment was not yet on the horizon, but it was coming. The life he knew, the sounds, the smells, the gentle pulse of family, the secret dreams of horses and songs, was about to collide with a system that would mistake silence for guilt, caution for cunning, observation for conspiracy. For now, however, JJ Velazquez was still just a boy in the Bronx, alive in every sense that mattered, aware, thoughtful, dreaming, untested by the cruelty that awaited him. This is the life before the stolen years, the life that would haunt him and anchor him through decades of injustice. The day the police came for JJ Velazquez, the air felt heavier than usual. A low gray sky pressed down over the Bronx, and even the familiar sounds, the honk of a taxi, the distant wail of a siren, the laughter of children, seemed muted, distant, as if the city itself was holding its breath. JJ had no idea that the very routines that gave him comfort, the clatter of dishes, the smell of laundry, the distant echo of horses at the track, would soon be weaponized against him. He remembered the knock at the door. Firm, insistent, the uniformed officers entering without explanation, a flurry of questions that came before he could even finish his first sentence. In that moment, the apartment became alien. His walls, once familiar and protective, felt like the bars of a cage. The air was thick, metallic with tension. The arrest itself was surreal. He had never touched a gun, never been in a violent altercation, and yet the world shifted in a single, incomprehensible instant. The police spoke in patterns he could not decipher, statements, leading questions, assumptions masquerading as concern. Each word, each pause, was calculated, pressing him toward a conclusion he did not understand. The courtroom was no sanctuary. It was a theater of shadows. Witnesses appeared, some familiar, some strangers, each a ghost in the system's narrative. There was a woman, traumatized and anxious, asked to identify him under the harsh fluorescent lights. Her eyes darted nervously, her voice trembled. And yet, in the record, her uncertainty became certainty. JJ was the man, they said. He was the culprit. The court believed what it wanted to believe. Then came the jailhouse informant, a figure as fluid as smoke, whose testimony carried the weight of a deal, not truth. He spoke of confessions JJ never made, stories woven in the quiet corners of a cell, echoes of fear given substance by desperation. Every word was a trap, a phantom evidence stitched together to form a narrative that left no room for innocence. JJ's own voice faltered in the face of these ghosts. Hours bled into days, questions looping endlessly, until exhaustion gnawed at him from the inside. He wanted only clarity, to tell the truth, but each attempt seemed inadequate. The interrogations were designed to break him, not through violence, but through relentless confusion, a suffocating pressure that made him doubt his own memories, his own judgment. He remembered staring at the witness stand, at the prosecutors, at the judge, and feeling invisible. The courtroom lights were harsh, glaring, as if designed to strip him bare. The scribbles of lawyers' notes blurred together. Every nod, every pen stroke felt like accusation. Each page of the court transcript became a prison within the prison. He was reading words written for a boy who no longer existed, words that made him a villain he had never been. Outside, the city moved on. Streetlights flickered, children ran past, dogs barked in backyards, vendors shouted over their carts. JJ could see none of it. He existed only in the interrogation room, the witness's anxious gaze, the jailhouse snitch's whispered lies. These ghosts constructed a reality so convincing that even he began to question the solidity of his own life. When the verdict came, it was final, precise, and terrifying. Guilty. The word cut through the silence like a blade. He was 16 years old. The world had labeled him a murderer. The system had drawn its line, and there was no room left for hesitation, doubt, or humanity. JJ Velazquez, the boy who had loved horses, music, and quiet Sunday mornings, was gone. The real shooter, the man who had pulled the trigger, who had walked away into the night, was invisible, untraced. A phantom. The witnesses, the informants, the courtroom, and the jury had sewn a tapestry of guilt from shadows, from half-truths, from manipulated memories. JJ's life, vibrant and ordinary a week before, became a story written by others, a fiction imposed on reality. Psychologically, it was suffocating. Every heartbeat echoed with uncertainty. Every memory became suspect. He began to imagine conversations that had never happened, gestures misread, intentions misconstrued. The weight of a conviction for a crime he did not commit pressed on him like a physical force, a gravity that could crush bones and spirit alike. The ghosts were everywhere, in the cell, in the courtroom, in his own thoughts. They became his world. Yet, even here, something flickered. A small, private insistence that his life, his truth, was still real. He remembered the scent of his mother's cooking, the hum of the city outside, the sun glinting off the tracks at Aqueduct. Those memories became talismans. They did not undo the horror, but they reminded him of the boy who had existed before the system's machinery had declared him dead in spirit. In this trap of shadows and echoes, JJ learned the first lesson of survival in a world that had already judged him. To endure, he had to cultivate a private self that could not be touched, a memory, a heartbeat, a stubborn insistence that he was still human, still alive, even as the world painted him a monster. The arrest, the trial, the coerced testimonies, they were not merely procedural steps. They were the architecture of a prison before the bars, a psychological labyrinth designed to erase the boy while claiming justice. And for J.J. Velazquez, the boy of 1998, there was no way out, only the slow, grinding passage into a future stolen before it had begun. Inside the walls of Sing Sing and later Green Haven, time had no mercy. There were two clocks that governed Jon-Adrian J.J. Velazquez's life, the world's clock and his own. Outside, the Bronx moved forward. Cities evolved. Tragedies and triumphs unfolded. And J.J. was allowed only a fractured view. Glimpses through bars, flickering television screens, snippets of newspapers smuggled past the guards. The world's clock ticked relentlessly. In 2001, Americans watched towers collapse in New York, the smoke rising like a dark monument over Manhattan. J.J. saw it on a grainy prison TV, the voices distant, the faces faceless. The horror touched him secondhand, but it reminded him that life continued, unforgiving and indifferent, without him. The iPhone came, then social media, then pandemics that forced the outside world into isolation. Each innovation, each cultural shift, was a reminder that he had missed it all. Birthdays, graduations, quiet dinners, the small victories of living. Meanwhile, JJ's clock moved differently. Each day was both eternal and fleeting. The same fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The same clatter of the tray slide brought breakfast. The same guards passed by with routine expressions of authority and indifference. Legal paperwork accumulated, motions were denied, letters unanswered. Every day was a repetition of the last, a mirrored echo of despair, frustration, and relentless uncertainty. In the mornings, he would lie awake on the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling. He measured time by the small things: the angle of the sunlight through the tiny window, the patterns of dust motes dancing in the beam, the distant bark of a dog outside the prison fence. It became a ritual, an anchor. He had to mark the days, or risk losing the sense of self entirely. Memories of home, of family, became both solace and torment. He remembered the soft laughter of his mother, the smell of her perfume lingering on the couch cushions, the warmth of his brother's hand in his own. Those recollections were precious, but each repetition reminded him of what he had lost. A life outside, full of noise, music, and the touch of others, existed without him. JJ's consciousness became a paradox, alive but invisible, present but erased. Social interactions within the prison walls were tentative. He learned to navigate a system of hierarchies, guards, and fellow inmates, each with their own codes and patterns. Friendship existed, but trust was scarce. He spoke carefully, laughed sparingly, and learned to retreat into internal solitude. Every conversation was a negotiation, every glance a subtle measure of safety or danger. Education became a lifeline. JJ spent hours reading, writing, learning law, and analyzing past cases. It was an act of defiance, a reminder that his mind could remain free even if his body could not. He memorized legal codes, argued motions, and studied the flaws in the evidence that had condemned him. Each small victory in the classroom was a momentary reclamation of autonomy. But hope was dangerous. Too much hope could be shattered in an instant by a denied appeal, by a missed deadline, by the crushing weight of bureaucracy. He learned to temper it, to cultivate a careful balance, enough hope to survive, enough detachment to endure. Each day required vigilance, patience, and the constant negotiation between despair and resilience. JJ's internal clock also recorded the slow erosion of identity. He watched himself age in mirrors and windows, the gradual graying of hair, the deepening lines around eyes once bright with curiosity. Youth gave way to adulthood inside a cell, milestones passed unnoticed. Friends married, children were born, families aged, and he remained a ghost in their lives. Each missed moment was a wound, a reminder that time had not been stolen abstractly. It had been stolen from the core of his existence. Yet, even in this suspended reality, he found ways to assert agency. Legal research, appeals, writing letters, keeping meticulous records of his days, and nurturing relationships with allies outside became rituals that tethered him to hope. Each small step was a resistance against the erasure of self, a declaration that though the system had labeled him a monster, he remained human. The contrast between the two clocks was starkest during moments of collective experience. When disasters struck the world, like hurricanes, terrorist attacks, or global pandemics, JJ observed them as an outsider. He absorbed the emotional weight, but it felt remote, unreal, as though watching history through a fogged window. Life continued, but he remained suspended, untethered, carrying grief and memory in parallel timelines. In solitary reflection, he often imagined the city outside, streets bustling with energy, the smell of roasting chestnuts in winter, the music spilling from corner bodegas, the laughter of children playing stickball. He imagined himself walking those streets freely, breathing air that wasn't recirculated, touching surfaces not behind steel bars. Each imagined sensation was bittersweet. It reminded him that the world existed beyond his prison, but it also reminded him that he was missing it all. Some nights, JJ dreamt of reclaiming time. In these dreams, he was not confined. He walked freely, spoke with his family, touched the hands of friends long forgotten. These dreams ended abruptly, as all dreams do, leaving him with the weight of absence. Yet they were essential, proof that somewhere within him, a life untainted by injustice still existed. The prison routine was brutal in its sameness. Meals, yard time, roll call, lights out, all repeated with mechanical precision. The two clocks ticked. The world moved forward, unseen. JJ's time circled endlessly, a loop of repetition and endurance. He came to understand that survival required mastery over the mind as much as over the body. To endure 25 years, he had to preserve not just health, but memory, identity, and a fragile ember of hope. And yet, amidst monotony and despair, small signs of justice flickered. Lawyers, advocates, and concerned outsiders occasionally reached through the walls. Every letter, every phone call, every acknowledgement from the outside world became a lifeline. They were fragile, intermittent, but they reminded JJ that his story was not entirely erased. He was still seen, still heard, still alive in the consciousness of those who refused to let the truth die. In this purgatory, JJ Velazquez became a man apart from time. One clock measured the relentless march of a society evolving without him. The other measured the slow decay and stubborn persistence of a spirit confined yet unbroken. And in this duality, between the world that moved and the cell that held him, JJ survived, sustained by memory, hope, and the unyielding conviction that truth had not abandoned him. Somewhere beyond the bars, beyond the cold walls, beyond the rhythmic hum of fluorescent lights, the world whispered. It was quiet at first, a murmur carried in letters, a name mentioned in court, a fleeting spark on a news feed, but it was enough to reach JJ Velazquez in his cell. Hope, long dormant, stirred like a hesitant candle flickering in darkness. He remembered the first mention of Martin Sheen, a name attached to petitions, advocacy, and the rare media attention. JJ had watched, incredulous, as the actor's voice spoke about injustice, about false confessions, about lives stolen, and the need for action. The words seemed unreal, almost fantastical. Why would someone so far away care about him? But they did. And for a man isolated for decades, that distant care became a fragile tether. Then came Kim Kardashian, whose name lit up social media feeds and legal bulletins alike. JJ learned that she had used her platform to call attention to his case, to to shine light on the systemic failures that had condemned him. He watched interviews, short clips, public statements, and he felt a strange, complicated emotion, gratitude mixed with disbelief, hope mixed with fear. Could this attention change anything? Or was it another illusion, a phantom of justice as mercurial as the jailhouse informants and misremembered witness testimonies that had already haunted him for decades? Letters began to arrive. Not many, but enough. Handwritten words on thin paper, meticulously folded, arriving like small messengers from the outside. Some were from lawyers, some from advocates, and some from strangers who refused to forget. JJ read them over and over. He traced the ink with his finger, memorized each word. Each letter became a lifeline, proof that while the world had turned, while he had been trapped in a cell measuring time and anguish, someone still saw him, still believed in him. He remembered one night vividly. The cell was colder than usual. Winter had pressed its gray fingers through the barred window. He sat on the edge of his bunk, a single letter resting in his lap. The words spoke of an appeal, of renewed legal strategies, of people outside willing to fight for him. JJ's hands shook, not from the cold, but from the strange, terrifying stirrings of hope. For a moment, he allowed himself to believe that freedom was possible, that life beyond these walls, beyond this purgatory, could exist. And yet, hope in a place like this was precarious. Each day brought reminders of fragility, denied motions, misfiled paperwork, bureaucratic indifference. The outside world's clock continued ticking, sometimes cruelly fast. He heard about new laws, societal changes, technological innovations, all of it a reminder that the years he had lost could never be replaced. Hope could lift him, yes, but if it shattered, it would hurt even more than despair had in its cold, steady way. JJ learned to measure hope in increments, to treat it like a fragile flame. Small victories mattered more than grand promises. A sympathetic judge, a carefully written petition, a supportive advocate in court. Even the faint mention of his name on a public platform was enough to remind him that the world had not entirely forgotten him. He thought often about the lives he had missed. Children growing up, families forming and changing, the ordinary pleasures of freedom, a walk in the park, a cup of coffee in the morning sun, the sound of a familiar song drifting through a neighborhood. He imagined Martin Sheen reading the court transcripts with furrowed brow, imagining himself in JJ's place, feeling the injustice. He imagined Kim Kardashian raising her voice in public, insisting that truth be acknowledged, that a system that had failed must be confronted. These were distant echoes, not salvation. JJ could not feel the warmth of freedom. He could only sense it, like sunlight filtering through storm clouds. And yet, these echoes had power. They reminded him that although the world's clock had moved on without him, there were still humans outside willing to intervene, willing to fight, willing to acknowledge that a mistake had been made. Inside, JJ grappled with conflicting emotions. Gratitude mixed with guilt, relief mixed with fear. Could he trust these distant champions? Or would they become another layer of illusion, another phantom in a life already haunted by shadows? He had learned to protect his heart, to hope cautiously, to resist letting the world convince him that he was powerless. Legal battles gained momentum. Petitions were filed. Appeals were argued. Public awareness grew incrementally. Each effort was a reminder that justice was not instantaneous. It required persistence, attention, and the willingness of others to amplify what he alone could not. JJ clung to these movements with the same tenacity he had clung to memories of his mother, of quiet Sunday mornings, of his own humanity before it was nearly erased. Yet the fight was emotionally exhausting. The human spirit, even when resilient, is fragile. Hope, when deferred for years, becomes both sustaining and dangerous. JJ felt it like a double-edged sword, energizing him to continue, but constantly reminding him of the decades stolen, the milestones missed, the youth and vitality that could never be returned. He wrote letters, cataloged evidence, memorized timelines, and rehearsed arguments in his mind. Each action, though small, was a defiance of the erasure imposed by his wrongful conviction. It was a declaration that he existed, that he had a voice, that his story could not be silenced, even from inside the cell. In rare moments of reflection, JJ allowed himself a glimpse of the future. He imagined standing outside, breathing fresh air, feeling the sun on his skin. He imagined sitting with loved ones, sharing a meal, speaking freely without fear of judgment or accusation. But these visions were tempered by reality. He was still confined, still measured by walls, still at the mercy of a system that had already failed him once. And so he waited, for the law, for advocacy, for distant echoes that became louder, more insistent, until finally they promised the faintest chance of a new day. He knew that hope could break him as easily as despair had, but he also knew that without hope, survival would have been impossible. In this echoing anticipation, J.J. Velazquez's spirit endured. His life remained stolen, but his determination, his insistence on truth, and his fragile hope were unbroken. Even as the years ticked by, he clung to the knowledge that somewhere beyond the prison walls, humans remembered him, that the world was capable of justice, even if it had arrived slowly, in whispers, in distant advocacy, in the tireless insistence of those who refused to let his story die. The dawn never arrived. Not truly. Each morning in the cell began the same way. The scrape of metal on concrete, the click of locks, the unchanging gray of walls that seemed to breathe in unison with his own chest. Time outside had moved decades ahead. JJ could only imagine the years passing in fleeting headlines, digital news feeds, the chatter of social media, the rise of phones smarter than his own mind had once imagined. But inside, the day was always 1998, frozen in motion, repeating itself with cruel constancy. He paced his cell, tracing the cracks in the walls, imagining they were lines on a map leading him back to freedom, to life, to the people he had loved. His hands would press against the bars, fingers splayed as though he could push the years forward, as though he could shatter the rigid continuity of imprisonment. And yet, nothing moved. The bars remained, the walls remained, and he remained, a shadow of the boy who had once dreamed of normalcy. The stolen years whispered to him, 25 years in the flesh, but lifetimes in memory. He remembered the laughter of family gatherings, the smell of fried food on Sunday afternoons, the warmth of a mother's hand on his shoulder. Each memory was a knife, sharp and bittersweet, cutting him into pieces, reminding him of a life half-lived. These recollections were both sanctuary and torment, proof that he had been more than the system's mistake, but also that everything he had known had been stolen. Letters arrived sporadically. Each one carried the same cautious optimism from distant allies, legal teams, advocacy groups, even celebrity voices echoing through the corridors of news. Kim Kardashian had continued her advocacy, her name synonymous with the rare attention his case had received in the public sphere. Martin Sheen's voice remained an emblem of the outside world pressing its gaze upon the injustice. But each letter, each mention, reminded him that hope was distant, intangible. It could be nurtured, yes, but it could also vanish like mist. Every legal document became a ritual. He memorized the motions, reviewed court transcripts with relentless attention, cataloged evidence like a scholar of his own life. These tasks were not just about winning freedom. They were about preserving his identity. For every legal setback, for every dismissed motion, he felt a fracturing, a subtle erosion of the self that had survived initial trauma, decades of isolation, and the relentless psychological pressure of living as a convicted man for a crime he did not commit. JJ's mind often returned to the phantoms that haunted him in court. The ghost of the flawed eyewitness who had misidentified him, the jailhouse informant whose words had skewed the scales of justice, the true shooter who remained free. These specters were no longer mere characters in his tragedy. They were the architects of his stolen decades. Yet, he also realized that fighting these ghosts required him to transcend his own despair, to argue against shadows, to insist upon truth in a world that often preferred silence. The public's attention had waxed and waned. Brief surges of media coverage, viral segments, advocacy campaigns. They were waves that lifted him slightly before receding, leaving him floating again in the stagnant waters of prison life. Each cycle reminded him that justice was not guaranteed, that freedom was still a question mark. The very uncertainty became a weight he carried constantly. Even amidst the despair, JJ's mind clung to minutiae. A sunbeam through a window, the clatter of food trays, the rhythm of footsteps in the corridor. These small signals became his anchors, reminders that he was still alive, still human, still capable of perception, emotion, and reflection. In this suspended state, he became an observer of his own life, a man trapped in a narrative he did not write, yet determined to maintain authorship over his inner self. At night, sleep was uneasy. Dreams brought fragments of the world outside, distorted by time and longing. He would walk streets he barely remembered, attend gatherings that never happened, hear laughter that belonged to someone else. And always, the dawn returned with its cruel insistence that he was still here, that the cell walls had not yielded, that the stolen decades remained just out of reach. JJ reflected often on the idea of time itself. For the world, 25 years had passed, marked by historic events, technological revolutions, cultural shifts. For him, the passage of time had been both unbearable and stagnant. He had aged, yes, but he had also remained suspended, a man living simultaneously in the past and present. His identity had been bifurcated, part trapped in memory, part eroding under the weight of official narrative. Letters and advocacy efforts continued. Lawyers pressed, petitions circulated, public pressure built slowly. JJ felt each step of the process as a distant tremor, a vibration in the monotony of his prison life. Yet he dared not celebrate. Each wave of potential progress carried the possibility of disappointment, of delay, of renewed stagnation. Hope remained fragile, a weapon and a threat simultaneously. Even when rare glimpses of support came, JJ's emotional response was complex. Gratitude was tempered by caution. Relief was undercut by fear. He knew that freedom could be delayed, deferred, or denied, and that even the best-intentioned efforts could falter. The psychological weight of this duality, hope and fear intertwined, was a constant companion. JJ imagined speaking to a stranger, explaining the erosion of time, the theft of youth, the ongoing struggle to reclaim identity. How could he convey the essence of life measured in absence, in moments lost to bureaucracy, prejudice, and error? Words seemed inadequate. Only the quiet, persistent assertion of self remained, a man still present, still resisting erasure. And so he waited, not passively, but deliberately. Each day, he performed the rituals that had sustained him for decades, cataloging evidence, reading legal texts, reflecting on memory, responding to letters, and clinging to the distant echoes of hope from those who refused to forget. Every heartbeat in his chest was a testament to endurance, a silent rebellion against the machinery that had tried to erase him. JJ's story had no final chapter, at least not yet. The stolen life remained unreturned. Freedom remained aspirational. The true killer remained unidentified. And yet, the narrative persisted, carried forward by those who had become part of his story: advocates, public figures, legal allies, and countless unseen supporters who refused to let his case fade into obscurity. He pictured a sunrise he might never see, a dawn unclaimed, a day that could restore even a fragment of what was taken. And though the wait was agonizing, JJ clung to the knowledge that endurance itself was meaningful. That survival, assertion of truth, and persistent advocacy were forms of victory, even when tangible freedom remained out of reach. In this unwritten dawn, Jon-Adrian JJ Velazquez exists as both witness and prisoner, a life held in suspension, a spirit unbroken, a story unfinished. The cell remains, the bars endure, the clock continues ticking, both the world's and his own. And the final question hangs in the air, inescapable and haunting. When will justice arrive? When will stolen years be acknowledged? When will a man reclaim not just freedom, but the narrative of his own life? The answer remains unseen, suspended in time, as JJ continues to live in the shadow of a world that has moved on without him. After 25 years, the iron gates finally opened. JJ stepped into a world that had moved on without him. Streets unfamiliar, technology unrecognizable, friends and family aged by decades. The air felt different, heavier with possibility and lighter with relief. Every breath he took carried the weight of lost years, the echo of a youth stolen, and the faint, fragile joy of freedom regained. Yet, freedom was bittersweet. The time that had been taken could never be returned. Moments with loved ones, birthdays, first steps of nieces and nephews, all lived without him. JJ understood that the world would celebrate his exoneration, but only he could feel the true cost, the silent, invisible theft of his life. As he walked forward, JJ carried with him a profound message, that resilience is not the absence of despair, but the determination to survive it. That hope can persist even in the bleakest shadows, and that the human spirit, though battered and bruised, can endure what the system meant to break. His story is a warning and a call to action. Wrongful convictions happen every day, leaving ordinary people trapped in extraordinary suffering. Each case is a reminder that justice must be vigilant, evidence must be sacred, and society must never forget those it has failed. If you've been moved by JJ's story, if you believe in the fight for truth and the human cost of wrongful convictions, then subscribe to the channel. Share this story, comment your thoughts, and join us in exposing the injustices the world tries to ignore. Because these are not just stories about the law. They are stories about lives stolen, families shattered, and the unbroken will of people like Jon-Adrian JJ Velazquez, a man who survived 25 years behind bars, only to reclaim what no one could ever take from him: his dignity, his story, his voice.